She was just 15 when she fell in love with the man she thought was her soulmate. By 19, she was married, a mother, and living what seemed like a fairy tale life in Greece. But one ordinary night, that dream turned into a nightmare when police found her lifeless body in her own home. At first, everyone believed it was a tragic home invasion, but the shocking truth, the killer was much closer than anyone could have imagined. Tonight, we uncover how a story of love and trust turned into one of the most chilling betrayals in modern true crime. It was just past midnight in a quiet Athens suburb when police entered a home that looked like the scene of a horror film. A young mother lay lifeless beside her baby's crib. Her husband, a helicopter pilot, sat tied to a chair, barely able to speak. He told officers that masked burglars had broken in, tortured him, and killed his wife before vanishing into the night. The story sent shockwaves across Greece, and news anchors described it as one of the most brutal home invasions the country had ever seen. People wept for the husband, who was now a widower at just 33, left to raise his infant daughter alone. He became a symbol of tragedy, a man who had lost everything. But as investigators combed through the evidence, something felt off. The crime scene didn't match his story. Small details didn't add up. And hidden deep inside the victim's diary, detectives discovered words that would unravel the entire tale. Because this wasn't the work of strangers, the truth was far darker, and it was sitting inside that very house. On the surface, Caroline Crouch and Babis Anagnostopoulos seemed to have it all. She was just 20, a bright university student with her whole life ahead of her. He was 33, a charismatic helicopter pilot, admired for his career and his charm. Together, they looked like the kind of couple straight out of a magazine, young, beautiful, and living a dream life in Athens with their infant daughter Lydia. Their Instagram pages painted a picture of bliss, tropical vacations, smiling family portraits, snapshots of a love story that seemed almost too perfect. To the outside world, Caroline and Babis were the definition of happiness. Friends described them as inseparable. Neighbors said they looked like a fairy tale family. So when news broke that masked burglars had broken into their home, tied up babies, and killed Caroline while their baby slept just a few feet away, the entire nation of Greece mourned with him. Here was a young man, a devoted husband and father, who had lost everything in one brutal night. But behind the glossy photos and public sympathy, investigators would soon uncover another side to this story, a side hidden in private words, written in a secret diary, words that painted a far darker picture of the so-called perfect couple. And what those pages revealed changed the entire direction of the investigation. As investigators searched for clues, they uncovered something that Caroline had kept hidden from almost everyone, a personal diary. Within its pages, the picture-perfect marriage began to crack apart. Caroline had written about feeling trapped inside her own home, suffocated not by burglars or strangers, but by the very man who was supposed to love her. She described moments of deep unhappiness, fights that spiraled into screaming, and nights where she felt her husband's jealousy and control tightening around her like a noose. In one entry, she wrote that she no longer recognized the person she had married. In another, she confessed she wanted to leave but felt powerless, afraid of what might happen if she tried. To friends, Caroline sometimes hinted at her frustrations, but on social media, the world saw only smiling photographs of a young mother who looked like she was living a dream. But the truth was, Caroline was documenting a nightmare, one that was unfolding behind closed doors while everyone else saw only the fairy tale. And when investigators read those words, the idea of masked intruders started to look like nothing more than a carefully staged illusion. At first, Babis's version of events sounded convincing. He told police that 3 masked men had broken into their home, demanding cash and jewelry. He said they tied him to a chair, ransacked the house, and then smothered Caroline when she tried to resist. But detectives quickly began noticing details that didn't fit. For one, there were no real signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no splintered doors, nothing that suggested a violent break-in. Even stranger, valuable items like electronics were left untouched, while only a small amount of cash was missing. Then came the technology. Caroline's smartwatch revealed movement and heart rate data that didn't line up with Babis's timeline. At the time he claimed to be unconscious and tied up, the device showed Caroline's final moments that suggested something far more intimate and chilling than a random burglary. CCTV footage from the neighborhood also raised suspicions. Security cameras showed inconsistencies with the story Babis had repeated to both investigators and the press. Piece by piece, the so-called home invasion was beginning to collapse, and as the cracks widened, suspicion slowly turned toward the grieving husband himself, the man who had been crying on television just days earlier. For weeks, Babis played the role of a shattered widower flawlessly. Cameras captured him carrying his baby daughter in his arms at Caroline's funeral. He sobbed openly, clutched Caroline's mother in a tearful embrace, and gave heart-wrenching interviews about the night his world collapsed. To the public, he was the face of tragedy, a man who had witnessed his wife's brutal murder and was now left to raise their infant child alone. Sympathy poured in. Politicians condemned the barbaric burglars, while news outlets replayed Babis's emotional pleas for justice. But behind the scenes, investigators weren't buying it. They noticed how calm he seemed during questioning, how carefully his words were chosen, almost rehearsed. They studied his behavior, waiting for the moment his mask might slip. And then as the evidence mounted, detectives made their move. On the day of Caroline's memorial, police quietly escorted Babis away, telling the family they needed him for further questioning. What followed would turn the entire nation's sympathy into pure outrage, because within hours the grieving husband would confess to a truth darker than anyone imagined. Inside the interrogation room, the walls finally closed in on Babis Anagnostopoulos. For nearly 6 weeks, he had lived a lie and appearing on TV, comforting Caroline's family and insisting that masked killers had destroyed his life. But investigators had gathered enough evidence to tear that story apart. Faced with the smartwatch data, the missing CCTV footage, and the inconsistencies in his own testimony, Babis broke down. Hours into questioning, his carefully constructed facade crumbled. He confessed it hadn't been burglars, there were no masked intruders. On the night of May 11th, during yet another argument, he smothered Caroline to death while their baby cried in the room. Afterward, he staged the entire break-in, killing the family dog, scattering cash, and tying himself to a chair to sell his story. The coldness of the confession horrified detectives. For weeks, he had looked Caroline's grieving mother in the eye, carrying her granddaughter in his arms, while hiding the fact that he was the killer. The man once seen as a victim was now unmasked as a manipulator, and his performance had fooled an entire nation. When news of Babis's confession broke, it sent shockwaves through Greece. The man who had once been pitied as a victim was now reviled as a cold-blooded killer. The sympathy he had earned evaporated overnight, replaced by fury and disgust. For Caroline's mother, the betrayal cut deepest of all. She had trusted Babis, even comforted him at her daughter's funeral, never imagining that he was the one responsible. Now she faced the unbearable truth. Her granddaughter's father had murdered her daughter in cold blood. In court, prosecutors laid out the chilling evidence. Caroline's diary was read aloud, exposing her growing fear and desperation. The smartwatch data traced her final moments, and witnesses painted a portrait of a controlling, jealous husband whose charm was only a mask. Babis sat before the judge, no longer a grieving widower, but a convicted manipulator. The verdict was clear: life in prison plus additional years for killing the family dog and lying to authorities. As the sentence was handed down, Caroline's mother was granted full custody of little Lydia. The baby girl would grow up with her grandmother, far from the man who had stolen her mother's life. But even with justice served, one haunting question remained. How could someone so close, so trusted, commit something so monstrous? Even after the trial ended, the shadows of that night never lifted. Caroline's mother, who now raises Lydia, admitted that the most painful thought is imagining her daughter's final moments, the fear in her eyes, the betrayal from the man she once loved. For the Greek public, the case became more than a murder. It was a national wound. It exposed how appearances can deceive, how the glossy image of a perfect family can conceal violence, control, and fear. Behind the Instagram photos and smiling portraits was a young woman desperate to escape a marriage that had become her prison. Babis Anagnostopoulos, once admired as a promising pilot and loving father, will now spend the rest of his life in a cell, remembered not for his charm but for the monstrous betrayal that shocked the world. As for Lydia, she grows up without the parents she once had, a mother stolen too soon, and a father who traded love for control. Her life is the most tragic reminder of all, that the real danger wasn't outside the home, but inside it all along. And it leaves us with one chilling question: how many more perfect marriages hide secrets just as dark? Caroline's story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones closest to us. What do you think? Was this cold-blooded murder inevitable, or could it have been stopped? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories where love, betrayal, and mystery collide, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss the next case.